Olivia had always been the perfect wife. At least, that's what she thought. She kept her home in pristine condition, made sure her husband, Greg, was fed and taken care of, and constantly tried to balance her own career with the duties of a loving wife. But behind closed doors, there was a secret she couldn't keep buried forever. Her best friend, Claire, had always been a woman of mystery, a confident, outgoing spirit who had a charm that made everyone around her swoon. But over the past year, something had shifted. What started as harmless flirtation with Claire grew into something deeper, something illicit. The two women had spent a quiet, stolen night together on a rainy weekend, and from that moment, Olivia was hooked. Every touch, every whisper, every stolen kiss filled a hole she hadn't known existed. Greg, her husband, was no fool, though. He wasn't a detective by trade, but he was perceptive, and something had started to feel off. His wife had become distant, and Claire's presence in their home had grown more frequent. He noticed the subtle change in Olivia, the way her eyes sparkled when Claire was near, the way her phone was always close to her, even in the middle of dinner. One evening, after a long day at work, Greg returned home early to surprise Olivia. As he opened the door, he heard voices coming from the living room. His heart dropped. It was Claire. And it wasn't just casual conversation. It was a sound he had never wanted to hear, the sound of Olivia laughing in a way she never did with him, an unguarded, genuine laugh. He froze in the doorway, listening intently. The words cut through the quiet house like a blade. "You know, it's crazy. I never thought I'd fall for someone like you," Claire said, her voice low and intimate. Olivia's response was soft, almost shy. "I didn't think I could either. But here we are." A heavy silence followed, and then the unmistakable sound of a kiss, wet, slow, and full of longing. Greg's blood ran cold. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but now that he had heard enough, there was no going back. He turned on his heel and left the house without making a sound. His heart hammered in his chest as he walked aimlessly through the streets, struggling to understand what had just shattered his reality. The next few days were a blur. Greg didn't confront Olivia immediately. He needed time to think, to strategize. He could have exploded in rage, thrown accusations in her face, demanded answers. But instead, he took a different route. Exactly how much Olivia valued her lifestyle, her house, her job, her reputation. And now, he had the power to take it all from her. Greg was a man of logic, and he could see clearly that Olivia was vulnerable. Her infidelity wasn't just a betrayal, it was an opportunity. He'd spent years building a career in real estate and had grown adept at reading people, understanding motivations. He knew that Olivia, despite her emotional attachment to Claire, would never give up her material wealth without a fight. So, he devised a plan, one that would strip her of everything she held dear. His first step was to gather evidence. He spent the next week discreetly collecting incriminating texts, emails, and photos that showed the extent of Olivia's affair with Claire. He hired a private investigator to follow her and document her movements, ensuring he had more than enough proof to ruin her in the eyes of the law. But Greg's plan didn't stop there. He knew that for Olivia to truly feel the sting of her betrayal, he had to make her believe that she was the one in control, that she had the upper hand. So, he played his part perfectly. He was calm, collected, and detached. He didn't let his anger show. Instead, he suggested they go to couples therapy, presenting himself as the concerned husband who only wanted to repair their fractured relationship. Olivia, naive in her assumption that her secret had gone unnoticed, agreed. She still loved Greg in some strange, twisted way, even if she was wrapped up in her own guilt. She was convinced that if she pretended nothing had changed, everything would go back to normal. But what she didn't know was that Greg's mind was already made up. He had a plan to destroy her, piece by piece. Weeks passed, and the therapy sessions only added to Olivia's sense of guilt. She felt like she was living in a dream, one where she was slowly suffocating under the weight of her own lies. Yet, she still couldn't stop seeing Claire. It was like a drug she couldn't quit. Then, one evening, as they were sitting at dinner, Greg dropped the bomb. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady, "I know about you and Claire." Her blood ran cold. She choked on her wine, staring at him in shock. What do you mean?" "I know everything. The affair, the secrets. I have it all documented," he said, pulling out a folder filled with photos and messages. Olivia's mind raced, her heart pounded. "Greg, don't try to lie," he interrupted. "Asking for an apology. I'm asking for something far more important. He paused, his gaze cold and calculating. I want a divorce. Her breath caught in her throat. You want a divorce? Greg nodded. But not just any divorce. I'm taking the house, the savings, the assets. Everything you've worked so hard for. You can keep your job, but that's it. And trust me, it's not a negotiation. Olivia's face went pale. What are you talking about? I know how much this house means to you, how much your lifestyle matters. So, I'm going to make sure you don't get to keep any of it. His tone was icy, methodical. This is your punishment, Olivia. For breaking me, for breaking us. Her world started to crumble around her as Greg laid out the details of his plan. He wasn't just seeking a clean break, he was going to make sure she suffered, that she would never forget the consequences of her actions. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Olivia fought tooth and nail to retain some semblance of her former life, but Greg was relentless. With the help of his lawyer, he systematically dismantled her defense. The affair was front and center in the court hearings, and the evidence Greg had gathered painted her as the villain in this tragic drama. In the end, Greg got what he wanted. Olivia was forced to sign the divorce papers, losing the house, the savings, and nearly everything she had worked for. The property that had once been their home, her sanctuary, was no longer hers. She was left with only her job and the memories of a life that had once felt perfect. As the ink dried on the final agreement, Olivia stood alone in the now empty house, staring at the walls that had once held so many memories. She had lost everything, except for her career. And in some twisted way, she was grateful for that. But the cost had been high. She had learned the hard way that betrayal, no matter how fleeting, would always leave scars. And Greg, well, he had learned that revenge was a dish best served cold.